Well, you've really done it again, dum-dums. You've come to the wrong place at the wrong time. That must mean it's the wrong stuff. Guy Denton, how you doing?
So glad we finally settled on exactly the intro this podcast deserves, and I am doing very well, Matt. It's good to see you. I'm looking unshaven and bum-like today, but that's, rest assured, it's not because I'm too lazy or disorganized to shave. It's really because I'm making a symbolic comment about the state of the race and how exhausting and depressing it is to the two of us.
Which brings us to our first clip of the day. J.D. Vance talking about why can't we just all get along?
Don't get personal all the time, but one of the things I've seen, especially from some of my wife's friends and some of my friends, is if they disagree with us on politics, sometimes they'll get very personal about it. And if you're discarding a lifelong friendship because somebody votes for the other team, then you've made a terrible, terrible mistake, and you should do something different. Like, don't cast aside. Like, most of my family obviously is going to vote for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and if they're not, actually, I need to talk to them. But I've got friends who like me personally, acquaintances who aren't necessarily going to vote for me. That doesn't make them bad people. And we can't. This is my most important advice. Whether you vote for me, whether you vote for Donald Trump, whether you vote for Kamala Harris, don't cast aside family members and lifelong friendships. Politics is not worth it. And I think if we follow that principle, we'll heal the divide in this country.
All right, that was News Nation. News Nation. Strong youth pastor vibes, once again, coming from J.D. Vance. Let me ask you, Guy, just for starters, have you ever lost a friend over politics? What's your philosophy on this?
Not to my recollection, no. And I think I've seen it happen to other people, or I've heard other friends of mine say they would never be friends with someone or romantically involved with someone who differed from them politically, and I think that's ridiculous. I think it's incredibly narrow-minded, and in a way it's self-destructive and as much of a contributing factor to a lot of the malaise that we're feeling in this country as anything any politician could do.
All right, so you're in the J.D. Vance camp, and that's where I've been all of my life, because I figure friends, and by the way, I mean, it used to be me as a conservative being friends with liberals, because if you go to Shepherd College in West Virginia, that's all you got. Believe it or not, it's a college town, very Republican state now, very college town. But I think that Donald Trump has changed things, and let me just throw out the devil's advocate here, okay? So, Donald Trump is someone who has been, convicted of 34 felony counts. He has been found liable of sexual assault. He has threatened to use the military against his political adversaries. He has threatened to want to shut down media outlets. He has called people like me human scum. And if someone cares about me, and they vote and they vote for him, that's kind of personal, right? I mean, we're not talking about like one candidate wants to have marginal tax rates a few points higher than the other. We're talking about really your morals, your values, your character, your judgment. Isn't that legit to, determine whether you're a friend or not?
Yeah, I had a feeling you were going to go in this direction, and it is an interesting point. What I would say is that I think we can take solace in the fact, and I don't know, how friends you may have, Matt, who are voting for Trump might be thinking, but I think the most encouraging thing is that the majority of people are not happy with either of these candidates, right? There's still a very healthy middle ground in this country, and I'm sure we both have plenty of friends like this who really would rather not vote for either of them, and especially Donald Trump, perhaps, but they feel as though they don't have a choice for whatever reason. I think reality is, life is complicated, right? And it's easy to try and ignore that fact. People naturally don't really want to confront that fact. But of the friends I have who are voting for Trump, I've argued with them about it, but they aren't, most of them, well, at least I hope, aren't paranoid fanatics in the QAnon mold, right? They have, in many ways, they may agree with me, or they may even lean, to some extent, in our direction of conservatism. They just see it as the sensible choice or the lesser of two evils or whatever have you, and we can disagree with that, but I don't think those disagreements are an indictment of their character or suggest that they've suddenly turned evil or that they're or that I shouldn't associate them with them anymore, But I am glad you brought this up, because it does set up some nice shameless brazen self-promotion on my part, which is my favorite hobby on the show, because last weekend I don't know if you've heard about this, there's an off-Broadway play in New York right now called Fatherland, which
Mm.
I've been asked to review for the Dispatch. The play, it's interesting. It dramatizes. It's correct to say that it dramatizes what happened on January 6th and the aftermath and what led up to it, but it does it through the prism of one family, and specifically the relationship between a father and son, where the father was a successful figure in the oil industry who lost his job when the bottom fell out of oil, and then in 2020 he slowly became radicalized and joined a militia group and drifted deeper and deeper into fanaticism and paranoia to the point where he was one of the people. He became one of the people who led the charge at the Capitol and went there armed with a gun and zip ties. And his son actually reported him to the FBI and got him arrested. And the play is really all about how
So this is a true story that they've made into. Right.
Yes, and what's interesting is now, I don't know how legitimate this is, but the claim in the playbill and at the beginning of the play is that all of the dialogue is actually taken verbatim from court transcripts and media interviews and real record conversations that happened and so on. And really what it's about is how, and I think this does lend credence to your point, how, it's quite rich for we can agree with the sentiment of what JD Vance is saying, but it's quite rich for JD Vance of a Trump campaign of all people to be making this point, where Donald Trump, I won't go as, just for the sake of this example, I won't go as so far as to say for his entire presidential term or from when he became the nominee or from when his bid for the presidency began or anything like that, but at least from after he lost the election through January of 2021, dedicated his entire remaining weeks in office, right, to trying to create exactly the kind of ruptures and exactly the kind of friction and divisions that JD Vance is arguing against in that clip. It was entirely his fault.
Oh yeah. No, I forgot to mention that Trump incited the Capitol riot. The first time we've not had a peaceful transfer of power. I forgot to mention he paid off a porn star, although it's included in one of those convictions. Not the paying off, but anyway, we can go into details. I forgot to mention that he asked the Georgia, was it Secretary of State, can you just find me 11,000 votes? And that he just recently called Kamala Harris a shit vice president. I think it was something like that. He called Ron DeSantis Ron DeSanctimonious. He made fun of Nikki Haley and said that her husband was joining the military or going on, going to serve his country to get away from her. And he said he didn't want Nikki Haley's supporters, get lost, basically. Yeah, I mean, just the idea that they're this big, cuddly, big tent or something is absurd.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the play, what's really interesting about the play, and this is probably the angle I'm going to explore more as I write the essay, but, we've seen no shortage of coverage in recent weeks of how this election, of the way this election has negatively affected the family unit. There's fractured relationships, fractured communities. There was an interesting piece in the Times a couple of weeks ago about how when they were doing surveys in Pennsylvania, what they found in deep Trump country was that although in public people would vocally say, I would know you, how could no one around here likes Kamala, everyone around here is pro-Trump, how could you even think of not backing Trump? And there were Trump signs in every yard. When they would actually go up to people's houses, right, and talk to people one-on-one in private conversations, invariably there would be one relative who said, I'm going to vote for Kamala. I don't like Donald Trump. I'm terrified by the prospect of a second Trump term, but I can't say that publicly. I have to be clandestine about it.
The New York Times, The Daily podcast has an episode today about Pennsylvania. And one of the things they do is, I forget, Lancaster County, maybe. Anyway, it's a group of women who are moved into the town 5-10 years ago, and they found each other and formed a support group, of Democrats or of Biden Harris voters in this Pennsylvania area because it was so Trumpy. Let me ask you, is it worth seeing? I know you're writing about it, and I know it raises this interesting question that you and I are discussing fortuitously, but in terms of art, is it actually good art?
It's interesting. It's one of those things where oftentimes with art, especially with like a movie or a play or a big production or something, if I'm unsure about it and the more I think about it, the less I'll like it, right? But in this case, I think actually the more I think about it, the more I like it and the more I appreciate what it was trying to do. And I did enjoy it when I saw it, there are only 4 actors. It's all in one room. It's a small off-Broadway production. I'm sure they'll try and take it on tour, but you have to go up to New York to see it. But the acting, again, for something off-Broadway, for something that stars relatively unknown character actors, is very impressive. I thought the actor who played the father did a terrific job. There's one very intense scene where, just on the strength of his performance and him reciting actual words that were spoken by the figure he's portraying, and through lighting and sound effects, they recreate the riot. And it's intense and captivating, and it's all really on the strength of a one-man show. I think it is worth seeing, and my initial impression was that it only gestured to a lot of different things, but didn't really add that much to the conversation. But the more I think about it, and the more I actually roll around in my mind what I think they were trying to say with it, and what I think they were trying to get at, the more of an appreciation I have for the fact that I do think it was actually quite powerful and made a worthwhile contribution in that way.
So my take now is, my take used to be totally put politics aside. I think my take now is I'm not going to throw away friendships, family relationships based on different politics or what somebody puts on Facebook. Like, as long as they're not hostile toward me or preaching to me, I'm okay with it. Not going to quit being friends or caring about them. It does disappoint me, and it does make me question their judgment. Like, I would not go into business with some of these people. And I think it's it's sort of like an asterisk. Like, I love them, but it makes me think. I think, I got to be honest. I think less of them, and I hate that. I think that's bad. But I think there are different reasons. Like, if someone had a valid reason or excuse, then that could mitigate it. But anyway, that's where I am. But this is a new development thanks to Donald Trump. Again, I never used to be this way. If it was Dukakis versus Bush or something like that, even though I was a hardcore Republican. But anyway, this is the new America, I guess.
That's right. No, I definitely, you are far from alone. I'm sure of that. What I would just stress, or I guess reiterate, and this may stem from, my immigrant optimism and the passion of an immigrant who wants to assimilate, right? But I think ultimately, this is far from the first or the greatest political challenge Americans have faced and Americans have been tasked with overcoming, right? And I think that ultimately I have enough of a faith in and appreciation for the resolve and ultimate right-headedness of Americans, and the ultimate good instincts and industriousness and kind-heartedness of Americans, to think that we'll make it through this, and to think that we shouldn't necessarily despair or go to quite that extreme, at least just yet. And also, there's no escaping the fact that millions upon millions of people are going to vote for Donald Trump, in much the same way that millions upon millions of people are going to vote for Kamala Harris. And many of them on both sides are going to do it holding their nose and with great reluctance, and thinking in the back of their mind, please let this be the last time, at least for a long time, but I have to do something like this. And I think that's worth keeping in mind as we push through the final days of this repulsive election cycle.
Well, I have a piece in The Hill arguing that if Trump loses, he will run again in 2028, if that cheers you up.
I agree. Yeah. Believe me. Yeah, it's great.
The stakes are high. Like, Donald Trump's longest chief of staff, John Kelly, essentially said that Trump is a fascist. And he said that Trump asked, like, why can't I have any generals like the Germans? Kamala Harris recently said in a CNN town hall that Trump is a fascist. So the stakes are high, and let me play this. So obviously, the crew at the Five are pushing back on this, trying to poke holes in this notion. And let me play this for you.
Get your commentary.
Well, you're right, because if Trump does win, then she's going to have to certify a fascist.
Right.
She's going to have to gavel a fascist into office. What, are they just going to hand the keys to the White House to Hitler?
Yeah. Are you
so they're either going to rise up and go nuts on the streets, Jessica, or they're just going to certify him like he's Mitt Romney and admit the whole thing was baloney. Mm-hmm. And that's probably what's going to happen. The whole thing was baloney. You can't even define fascism. I challenge Kamala to tell us what it is, because a majority of the country doesn't know the word. She needs non-college educated blacks, whites, and Hispanics to turn out for her. And she is smearing her rival as with a mid-20th century European political philosophy. Okay, Jessica.
You think people don't know what Hitler is?
She's calling him a fascist. Go out on the street, ask 20 people what that means,
send Johnny
Jessica.
on the Hitler
I
patrol.
will. I will. Don't you send my Johnny out there with my permission. So this is a Morning Joe hoax. This is a Morning Joe Biden close. This is why Joe Biden...
So look, I could play the clip if you want. John Kelly did define fascist. It's pretty damn close to Donald Trump, at least what he's saying. That's different than Hitler wanting to have a Holocaust, but the fascist stuff, it kind of checks out. And so the stakes are super high. And but I think what Jesse Waters is getting to there is, and someone else made the point, like, well, you would kill baby Hitler, wouldn't you? So the logical conclusion is what? We are in this weird state. The media's facing this. Certainly, I think Kamala Harris, if she has to certify the election for Donald Trump, will be facing this, which is Donald Trump's not a normal politician. These are not normal times, but we want to restore norms. So we have to act normal. And it's hard for so the media has to cover Trump like he's Mitt Romney. Kamala Harris has to certify Trump like he's Mitt Romney. And to not do so is you being like Donald Trump. Like if you, it creates this situation where either you fight fire with fire and therefore you are as bad as the other side, or you play by the old rules and thereby you get rolled over and steamrolled by Trump. It's a lose-lose scenario.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think really what this speaks to is that, in my view, this whole approach to tying up the campaign with the idea that going back to this idea that Trump is Hitler, Trump will govern like Hitler, Trump will turn America is like Weimar Germany, and Trump will push it over the edge into a modern Nazism, right, was misjudged in much the same way that I think it was misjudged in 2016 when Hillary Clinton tried to do it, and it did not work for her. She didn't succeed by taking this tack into making the election a referendum on Trump instead of a referendum on herself. And I think this is a challenge for Harris, because really what Harris needs to do, and what Harris really should have been working toward doing for months now, is exactly that: turning the election into a referendum on Trump and making sure, or doing her best to make sure that the election wasn't going to be a referendum on Joe Biden and her time with Joe Biden and Biden's presidency and what it will stand for and what its legacy will be. And I'm not convinced that she's accomplished that. And I think the proof of that is in the polling. If she had accomplished that, or if she had done a better job, then the race wouldn't still be neck and neck. So I think we're in a difficult position. I think they know they're in a difficult position, and they're not really sure how to get out of it. And this was the best strategy they had. And although absolutely, these are all powerful and salient points, all of the generals saying this about Trump is absolutely something of critical importance that needs to be stressed and needs to be discussed. But at the same time, for people who believe that Trump is Hitler, or that Trump has fascist tendencies, or that Trump could govern like a fascist, you're not going to be convinced of that this late in the game, right? You either made your mind up about that right from the first time he came down the golden escalator, or if the next 4 years didn't do it for you, you certainly would have been convinced of it by Stop the Steal and January 6th. So I think it's a problem they haven't really reconciled or figured out how to deal with, and it puts the election, as I think you were getting at, Matt, it elevates the temperature in a similarly unpleasant way to how things felt in 2020, and that isn't good for national dialogue or for the political system and model as a whole.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. Look, I thought that Joe Biden was playing we got to defend democracy, we got to defend liberal democracy card, partly because he couldn't play other cards. And it had worked. It had worked a couple times, but maybe how many years can voters be worried about defending? Every election can't be about, if we don't win this election, a fascist is going to take over. So I thought that Kamala Harris had sort of turned the page and reframed it from defending democracy to, freedom and abortion rights being under that rubric. But there must be polling to suggest that during this closing argument that there are some voters who will be moved by this, is all I can figure. Because it's not just John Kelly who maybe needs to clear his conscience here in the last couple of weeks, but it does seem like there is a movement to talk about this. I want to go to, so Charlemagne Dagad was on CNN with Anderson Cooper, and I want to play this clip because I think it underscores. So African American men are one demographic that Kamala Harris is worried about losing. She went on his morning radio show, Charlemagne's morning radio show, and here he is. He's on CNN, and he is basically making the argument that I was making a few minutes ago, which is their TV news treats Donald Trump like he's a regular politician. And anyway, I don't know if there's an answer, but here he is.
Apparently, apparently Trump's is going to tape a thing with Joe Rogan. Do you think she should do that?
I think that she should keep calling Donald Trump a fascist. And I think that Americans need to keep looking at the rhetoric of Donald Trump, because I don't know why we're even thinking about electing somebody who's talking about putting people in camps. I don't know why why we want to elect somebody who's talking about mass deportation. I don't know why we're having this conversation about somebody who wants to terminate the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election. Aren't we supposed to be a patriotic country? Whenever somebody like Colin Kaepernick takes a knee in this country, everybody talks about, oh, that's so unpatriotic. But a guy can say he wants to terminate the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election and nobody cares. Like even me bringing it up now, you brought it back to Kamala and Joe Rogan. Anderson?
Yeah.
Who gives a damn?
Well, I mean, I think you give a damn who's elected president. And
yeah,
I'm
especially
asking
if that president is a fascist. That's talking about putting people in camps. That's talking about, once again, terminating the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election. That's talking about, jailing his political opponents. Like, that rhetoric doesn't scare people?
Well, we talk about this every single. This is what
I don't think
I've been talking about this every night.
I don't think y'all have enough conversations about it. I feel like I heard more on this network about is Kamala Harris black than I do about Donald Trump being a fascist.
Well,
am I wrong, Angela?
Honestly, that's bullshit. I'm sorry.
Oh, I like that.
No, I'm not. Look, I'm a huge fan of yours.
Okay.
But to say that we're sitting around discussing is Kamala Harris black, like
I've seen that. I've seen those
that's
roundtable discussions a lot. Now that's
true.
Bullshit, Anderson. For you to say that y'all don't have those conversations.
I've never asked somebody is.
I'm not saying
Kamala
you.
Harris
I said the
black?
network.
He said the network.
I don't think anyone I don't think any anchor on this network has been going around saying, "Is she black?"
Y'all never
It's
had
definitely.
we have had. Look, I'm sure we have had, nutty people or people who have strongly held beliefs who I may disagree with, who somewhere on some panel have said something. But I will just speak up for what I do on the show. I do believe it's important to get people different viewpoints as long as they're willing to have a legitimate conversation. What I don't like are surrogates who come out and just spout talking points that they don't even believe, and those are people I try to eliminate from having ever on the air again.
I think no network has honest conversations about Donald Trump. Nobody's had honest conversations about Donald Trump since 2016. I saw last night they were talking about, the double standard that exists between Donald Trump and the vice president, but it's always a double standard with Trump, whether it's with Hillary, whether it's, against Biden, now with Kamala. We talk about him being a threat to democracy, but we don't treat him like one.
I don't know what you've been watching, but I don't know of any Trump supporters out there or people who like him who are tuning in to me every night to try to get, to be validated in their opinions. I don't know. I don't know. I disagree.
I don't think it's about validating. What you mean, validating the Trump?
Well, you're saying that we're not. That I guess you're saying I'm not discussing all the things he is saying.
The line where he says we talk about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy, but we don't treat him like one. I think there's some validity there, right? It's like they talk all the time. Donald Trump's horrible, horrible. Now let's go to a commercial. Donald Trump's horrible, horrible. Now let's go to the right-wing MAGA supporter we're paying, $100,000, $200,000 a year to come on and defend Trump. Like, it's a TV show. It's like Duke and Rocky 1. He doesn't know. He thinks it's a damn show. He doesn't know it's a damn fight. Like, if Donald Trump is really the threat they say he is, maybe a little urgency and emotion would be more. But then again, you don't want to be hysterical because then you've got Trump derangement syndrome, right?
Well, that's the thing, and that's why I thought Charlemagne's last point into that was actually quite interesting, because really I think what it speaks to is the fact that the media, especially the television media and big media institutions like CNN and ABC and so on, are struggling. And to many people, it's far more significant that Trump is going to go on Joe Rogan and be interviewed than Joe Rogan, but it would be if Trump went on CNN again a week before the election, right? And so what can the media do? If the media does, if an institution like CNN does take that tack, and does do what Charlemagne is asking for and exclusively focuses its coverage on trying to demonize Trump as a fascist and running endless roundtables where they talk about how much of an exigent threat Trump, exigent and existential threat Trump is to democracy, then what's going to happen? Trump is going to weaponize that. The MAGA movement is going to weaponize that, and they're going to play right into his hands and right into the hands of a narrative and right into the hands of a narrative that's being built up in the new media space and by outlets and institutions and podcasts and other groups that are trying to go against the established media and prevailing trends in the media. And I don't think they can take that risk. And so they're caught between, to ensure their relevance, they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, and we don't talk enough about this, but Trump couldn't have existed 25 years ago, like as a political force. There's a reason why he waited till 2016 to run. I mean, if you don't have Twitter, if you don't have, probably McCain-Feingold actually weakening the political parties. If you don't have, Rush Limbaugh talk radio didn't come on until like 1988 when he went national. Fox News didn't start until 96. YouTube didn't even exist until 05, 06. I don't know.
Right.
Like Donald Trump could not have done what he has done in a different media era. And so now cable news is dying, or at least being supplanted by podcasts and videos. And I don't know if you saw this. This is interesting. Brian Williams is going to host election night coverage on Amazon.com. And it strikes me as a brilliant idea, right? Like this guy is the quintessential anchorman. All you have to do is put him on a professional looking set behind a desk. You don't have to pay stringers or foreign correspondents. Heck, I'll come on and talk to him for free. But mostly he's going to just vamp. And he's going to probably just be looking at like the AP or Reuters when they call a state, or CNN. Those people will be watching the other networks. They're probably not going to beat anyone in terms of calling a state, but who cares? And I think for a relatively small amount of money, I think it's Amazon, correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to have like a pretty darn good product. And I suspect that over the years, you're going to see, like already we're seeing a ton of people who like streamers who will like stream during a debate. And they get, I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands probably of viewers. So it's just going to keep cutting away at the cable news and network news, at their audience.
And if they can even successfully pull hundreds of thousands of viewers away from CNN and the other networks, right, then that's a massive success. I mean, I think all of this also speaks to just the way that people consume media, be that news or other forms of media, is just radically changing. It's radically changing in real time before our eyes. It has been for at least the last decade, right? More and more people don't even own televisions. They get their news or they stay up to date on what's going on in the world on their phones, on their laptops, through podcasts, through skimming the headlines, through apps, maybe through watching clips, little bite-sized clips on TikTok or YouTube that give them their fix, right? Rather than sitting down on Sunday to watch any of the established programming. The real question is, and I think what's really interesting, and Ross Douthat had a column the other day that addressed some of this and explored this in a way, is how do we really quantify if this is the future? Because I don't think cable news is ever going to, or television news is ever going to become completely obsolete in much the same way that other things like, going to the movies or going to the theater or just generally watching television on cable is ever going to become obsolete. But I think they're all going to be increasingly niche and I guess hobbies that occupy the time of an ever diminishing and an increasingly small and dedicated number of people, right? But the real question is, if now big cable networks like CNN have to compete not just with written publications like the New York Times, but also with podcasts of all shapes and sizes, and with YouTube influencers, and with TikTok influencers, and with Twitter influencers, and new fringe social media platforms, and so on. How do you quantify the importance or the relevance of each of those things, right? How can you really? How do we get to a point where we can definitively say, yes, Trump going on Joe Rogan seems to people who are very online, well, very online is debatable in Rogan because he does have an exceedingly popular show, but still, you have to be fairly online to actually know what the Joe Rogan experience is, and for this to have even entered your radar in the first place, right? Is it more significant for Trump to go on Rogan than it would be just for Trump to go on CNN and do another town hall?
Well, he's going to get 10 times as many listeners and viewers on Rogan, right? I mean, just in
That's
terms of sheer numbers, it's a bigger audience.
But with all this sort of thing, right? How do we actually quantify? I think I remember we talked about this a bit the other week. How do we actually quantify the actual meaningful effect it might have on voters or on an election? Like, it's great that Trump might go on Joe Rogan and 10 million people might watch or listen to it. But those 10 million people could be listening to it at any time from anywhere in the world, right? Is it actually going to be something? And is this going to be? Are we heading toward a future where things like this actually make a significant dent in polling and actually have a significant influence on voters and on swaying people in a way that appearances on cable news can't do? That, I think, is the interesting question, and we're just going to have to wait and see.
All right, I want to end with this question that I've been pondering. It's an idea. So here's something that surprised me. Not a lot surprises me anymore because the bar has been raised, but there seem to be, there's some data to show this, but just also anecdotally, I hear from people, some non-trivial percentage of voters who voted for, they voted for Biden in 2020, and now they're voting for Trump. And that strikes me as really weird, right? Because I thought once you leave Trump, once you abandon Trump and you break this spell, you're gone. And besides, after 2020 is when, the election denial happened. It's after the convictions. It's after January 6th. So why would you vote for Biden in 2020 and then revert back to voting for Trump in 2024? We can, in a minute, hypothesize as to why that would happen. But are you also surprised by this phenomenon?
Not necessarily, because I think politics is a fickle business, right? And ultimately, people really respond to what they feel, and people respond to what's in their short-term memory more so than anything else, and how things seem to them on the ground at any given time, rather than anything that may have happened in even January 6th. And this has really struck me in going back and doing rewatching some of the documentaries about it and digging into some of the old long form reporting on it to write this review. To many people, it's now going to feel like a distant memory. For as much as I'm sure we both strongly believe that it should be permanently ingrained in the American mind as a national disgrace that should never be repeated, and there's a grim emblem of what could happen to the constitutional order if it isn't carefully respected and preserved. For a lot of people who may even share that sentiment, ultimately what's going to motivate them to cast a vote in an election is, do I feel safe? Can I feed my family? Do I feel like the economy is doing well? Do I feel like I'm actually better off in a material sense, in a personal sense, than I was 4 years ago, right? And do I feel as though the world is better off, and the world is a safer place, and the world is a place that's going to be better off for my children than I did 4 years ago? And I think for a lot of people, the Biden campaign and the prospect of the Biden presidency promised renewal, it promised restoration, it promised a pivot away from a never-ending nightmare of the Trump years, right? But really, once the Biden presidency began, people didn't feel like that was delivered to them. And now regardless of how they feel about Trump, they may still hate Trump in a lot of ways, but they're responding in kind.
So I think some of it could be that they voted because of COVID, like Trump. They wanted to turn the page from COVID, so they voted for Biden. Some of it could be that Biden in 2020 was this white, avuncular, moderate-seeming guy who didn't seem scary. Some of it could be that Kamala, despite attempting to really sell herself as a moderate, is scary because of her past left-wing positions. Some of it could be because she's a woman of color. And I think the bigger problem for her is actually that she's a woman. I think that there is more sexism than I probably realized. And I think that could be a drag. Some of it could be Biden. They voted for Biden, and then he immediately signs these executive orders weakening the border. He passes this huge spending bill, which I think contributed to inflation. He does this stupid Afghanistan withdrawal that was a complete disaster. And so he sows the seeds early on in losing their support. And so, I mean, there's a bunch of plausible reasons, but do you have a sense of which of those may be the strongest or something different?
Well, I would say I think it was your third point there about Harris seeming scary. To tie this back into to tie that back into where we began, I think the problem is that she's needed to pull off a very delicate balancing act between hammering home the point about fascism and the point about Trump being a danger and the point about how it would be irresponsible and potentially greatly dangerous, deleterious to the whole basis of America and the American experiment to return to Donald Trump and let Donald Trump back into the White House, right? That is important, but half of her campaign should have emphasized that. It shouldn't have been the entire focus, especially of the closing days of her campaign. The other half of her campaign should have been focused on carving out a clear identity for herself, not just as an alternative to Trump and everything that Trump wrought and everything that we could return to if Trump came back, and potentially far greater damage we could see if Trump came back, but also a clear identity as an alternative to Joe Biden, Biden pledged to be a bridge to the next generation, as a true candidate of renewal, right? As a true candidate who could push us forward, push the country forward, raise the country up in a positive way, pull us away from a lot of the kind of ugliness and bitterness that we've seen in recent years and that's animated people in recent years. I'm not convinced that she succeeded in doing that, but she succeeded in outlining a compelling and a clear agenda to convince people to rally behind her. And again, I think if she had, and that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't be seeing such tight polling and a race so startlingly neck and neck as we are right now, even in the waning days.
Have you been, other than watching this musical, this way off Broadway musical, have you anything you've been watching, enjoying lately?
Oh no, just endless documentaries about January 6th. It's been great. No, I'm trying to think. I feel like we talked about the Saturday Night Live movie, didn't we?
Oh, right. Yeah, we did. Yep.
I don't think I've really seen anything else lately that's made too much of an impression. Have you? Have you been watching or listening to anything good?
Yes, I might have mentioned this. My son and I watched Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds last
Oh,
week.
really?
It's on Netflix. I just watched Signs. I'd never seen it before. The Mel Gibson, Joaquin Phoenix vehicle, M. Night Shyamalan movie. Good potential. Didn't quite. I don't know. Have you seen it?
Not in a long time. When I was a kid, I think I saw it.
When you were a kid, I'm just getting around to it, and I could still consider it a modern movie that I just haven't gotten around to. It's don't ever get old, guy. Oh, and I just watched this this really good documentary. I can't remember the name, but I guess it's Mike Barnicle's sons have created this, but it's about the 2004 Boston Red Sox finally breaking the curse of the Bambino and defeating the evil New York Yankees. And we just finished it this morning, in fact, and I really enjoyed it. So I would definitely recommend it. If you have Netflix, check that out. Oh, and also, the wife and I, we're only 3 episodes deep, but we have started watching Nobody Wants This, the Netflix
really?
show about a podcaster, sort of like a Call Her Daddy type podcaster who dates a rabbi, and hijinks ensue. So so far, thumbs up. I mean, I'm not. It's not my faith, so I can't be offended or consider it sacrilegious. I suppose if you're dating an evangelical, we might have problems. But so far, I'm enjoying that. And that's the news from Lake Wobegon. We are going to do an episode earlier in the week next week, right? So there will be one more show before Election Day, Guy. Are you excited?
I am, well, excited is one word for it. Terrified is another. I'm not sure if they've become synonymous at this point.
Bill Scher and I have already made a commitment to, as painful as this is going to be, we are going to do the 270 to win and pick our states, those 7 swing states. And like I said, I think Pennsylvania is where the whole ball of wax is. I'm just going to throw a dart and pick the winner of the election, my prediction. But I hope next week maybe come prepared to make some premature predictions and wildly premature prognostication, because the truth is I don't know when we're going to even know
Right.
who won this race. I don't think I'm pretty sure it won't be election night when we find out who won. But you never know, right? Maybe one person runs away with it, and we do.
Do you have anything special planned for election night besides just crying? Will you just be watching the coverage at home, or?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, right? Like we could live stream and talk about it, but then I feel like I wouldn't. It's performative. I'm not
Right.
like experiencing it, so I think I'm gonna get really drunk. Really, it's my plan. Heavy drinking is the plan right now, and we don't want that on video. That's just for light drinking.
That's fair. Yes, I can respect that. I may be in. I haven't figured it out yet. I may be in Washington on election night. I may actually be in New York on election night, and a friend of mine is trying to convince me to watch for coverage in Times Square. I'm not sure whether doing that sounds more or less utterly abhorrent than just watching it in Washington, but just watching it from DC. So I guess we'll find out.
Just make sure to wear an adult diaper, because otherwise you're gonna be in trouble. So, all right, one way or the other, we will be back here. Good Lord willing, we will be back here before Election Day to make some wild predictions. We'll probably get it wrong. It's that time again. It's cold gin time, and you know what that means.
The election is spookier than Halloween itself, Matt. It will be appropriate timing for our prediction episode. But until then, no, it's good to see you as always.
All right, you drive us wild, we drive you crazy, and we'll see you back here in the wrong stuff next week. Thanks, Guy.
Always a pleasure, Matt.